Thank you for speaking with us here at the C20 today. We talk in civil society a lot about inclusive growth and the role of inclusive growth in lifting people out of poverty. How important is tackling corruption in this process?
Tackling corruption is essential, because if you don't, the countries will not have the resources that they will need to have in order to have universal health, universal education, in order to ensure that everybody has access to water, to jobs, and the like. So if you don't tackle corruption, what happens is that money that should go into treasury is siphoned off into banks or fiscal havens or in equity or in capital buildings out of your country, out of the country of origin. And it means that the people, are become the victims, because this is their money, their resources. If you have natural resources being extracted, where countries that have had this for a long time should be some of the richest countries in the world, many of them are the poorest countries in the world. The other thing which is important about corruption is that if you are in a country which is highly corrupt, each time you turn around, you're going to be asked for a bribe. If you want to have access to health services, you're going to be asked for a bribe, or you will be expected to pay, and you'll get the services if you pay. The same thing to get your children in school, or to gain access to health, to water, and other such amenities. So the poor are therefore doubly taxed. They're doubly victims. Not only do they not have the services that should be there in their community, a school or the like, but also they have to pay those bribes. And if your income is $500 US a year, and you pay a portion of that in bribes, there'd be very little left to feed the family.
It's not just an issue for developing nations, though, is it? This is a global issue. So how do we take a global approach to addressing this through the G20?
First of all, it is a global issue, because a lot of the money that is stolen from the poorer countries is found in our banks. It's found in our capital assets, sometimes in some of the companies that are in our countries. So this is why it's so important for all G20 countries to ensure that they live by the commitments that they made when they ratified the OECD Convention Against Bribing, and that any business which has been, where it is found, or there is evidence that they have been bribing in other countries, I think the country of origin of those companies, whether it's Australia, Canada, United States, or any other, must ensure that they have the right legislation, but also the right capacity in their police to do economic crime investigations. So that's one aspect, the bribery aspect. The other one, I think, relates to tax evasion. And if especially the companies, the more wealthy people, take their money and put it in tax havens or offshore where maybe the rate is a bit lower, what happens is that those people in our communities benefit from the infrastructure that is there, but they don't contribute to it. And it is the people like us who are salaried who pay for the infrastructure for the rich and for the community. So that's another aspect, the whole tax area, and a lot of work is being done right now by the G20, which is great in terms of developing a multilateral exchange of information. Standards have been developed, and by 2015, hopefully by the end of 2015, all countries will have given themselves the means to be able to live by what they have committed to, that is sharing tax information. So these are some of the things that I think our countries need to do. But in addition, I think if you're looking at the C20, at the G20, if you're looking at the G20 in a more comprehensive way, then of course we want to make sure that that you don't have two sets of laws. Those who have money and can afford to appeal forever, or for parliamentarians in some countries who have immunity against prosecution as long as they're parliamentarians, and then the rest of the people who face justice, and rightly so if there is a need for them to do so. So I think that that is something else which I think the rule of law equally applied is vital. And I think that the G20, where the wealth of the world is primarily, also have to decide on the kind of world that they want to live in and what they want their children to live in. And, if they want to have a world which is safe, which is peaceful, where you don't have the kind of extreme weather that we are increasingly getting from climate change. And if you want to live in a world where you don't have those who live in abject poverty, then you have to be ready and want to share your wealth with others. You want to share your expertise. You want to support countries around the world and communities, because we have poor communities in all our countries, that you don't have, this great disparity between the very rich and the very poor, because this is, preparing yourself for a future disaster.
There's certainly a theme of inequality that goes across all of the issues being discussed at the C20 summit, whether we're talking about tax evasion or corruption, climate change or poverty in the community. There's clearly a role, though, for civil society, businesses and governments to actually come together and collaborate on these issues. So how do they best collaborate in that sense, and how do we ensure there is equal participation in that process across these three different sectors?
In French, we say l'union fait la force. If you work together, you're going to be much stronger. And this is exactly what we're talking about here. And the governments are there to manage the public good. They're there to manage on behalf of the people. It is not the government's money, the government's resources. It is the people's money and resources and information which they are there to manage. And if you start with that mindset as a government, then you know that you must involve your people. You must get the people to participate in the development of budgets, in the planning, in new programs, in reviewing programs. And so it starts with citizens, the businesses that are there, civil society, because very often individual citizens do not have the power to be able to reach out. And civil society, as organized groups, are able to work with communities and share the views of the community at the higher level, be it at the state level, at the national level, or international level. So, and of course, businesses have a lot of power. Businesses provide huge quantities of services in our world and goods, and they have power because very often are very large, especially the very large multinationals. So when you have those leaders of industry who want to live in a clean industry, in a clean world, in a safe world, in a world where people are not living in abject poverty, then they will want to work and take the high road in working with both the governments and civil society. Because when we sit between government, civil society, and businesses, we very often agree on what the problems are. We very often agree on a number of solutions to those problems. But it's a question of sitting together and listening to each other.
That issue of power is really quite central here, isn't it? In that the C20 is in its infancy. It's a relatively new part of the G20 process, and a lot of the power could perhaps be centralised in the government element in the G20 and also in those powerful business interests. How do we ensure that the C20 is an equal and optimistic contributor to this process that has the same ability to influence and collaborate at the same time?
The very positive aspect of the C20 is that they represent just about every aspect of life in our communities, nationally and internationally. And therefore, you have a different kind of strength when this happens, because a lot of these issues are all interconnected. They don't stand on their own. As I was saying earlier, if you don't deal with good governance and corruption, you will not deal with some of the other major problems that people face today. So I think that, what you have in the C20 is this very broad representation. And each of the organizations very often start and have grassroots people as part of their network. So it starts with where the people are and then gradually increases at state, national level, and international level. So you have that connection between the international community, which is here at this meeting, and the local people who face who have to live their daily lives in sometimes very difficult situation. So if I were still in the government, as I worked in the government as a public servant for many years, I would certainly want to listen to civil society in the same way as I would want to listen to business, because we bring to the table our own expertise, but in particular with civil society, the connection, the direct connection with the people, and that's very important.
The power of people is the way to influence.
Power of people. And I think what we're saying, as I mentioned before, if you have certain essential values which are integrity, transparency, accountability, and the participation of people. And when you have these, as well as a commitment to share what we have, a commitment to fairness, when you bring those together, that is the real power.
Do you have a real confidence that the C20 is going in that direction, that not just this year, but in the years ahead, it will continue to have a growing role in the G20 process?
Well, I hope so. I'm an optimist, and I believe that many governments who are part of the G20 have come to the conclusion that you cannot just be on a road by yourself, that you need to involve the various groups that are part of our world, whether it be civil society organizations, be it business, being the academic sector, labor, these are all part of it. So I'm hoping that, if there are a few that like to put their feet on each side of the train to prevent it from moving forward, that they will lose their traction on the ground, because there will be the majority of the G20 governments who will realize that this is vital. The anti-corruption working group, for example, of the G20 is a very important instrument. It represents all the G20. They have met, but met equally with the B20 and the C20. I was in Rome 2 weeks ago representing the C20, and we were all at the same table, B20, C20, with the 20 representatives of the governments and the two co-chairs, one being an Australian, Alex Taylor, who is co-chair at this time of this group. Civil society has pushed very hard to keep this anti-corruption working group, because it is vital in helping the G20 to make the right decisions.
And there is a commitment we've seen now for an anti-corruption action plan to come out. What does that plan need to include to be effective in tackling and addressing corruption?
Well, I think that the measures that are being discussed now are all very important. First of all, when we're looking at the public sector, transparency in all aspects, but especially in the financial area, so that all revenues, all the budgets, and the disbursements of these budgets right to the point of delivery are transparent, are published, are available, not once a year, but on a very regular basis in a way that people will understand. In terms of public sector procurement, we estimate there'll be over 50 trillion worth of infrastructure built over the next 15 years around the world. And this is a sector which is highly vulnerable to corruption. So there is a lot of work being done around procurement to ensure that the whole process is so transparent that it'll be difficult to pay bribes to get a contract or to get collusion where all the costs increase. Because if you can easily lose 20, 30% of your money in procurement, or it can cost that much more to build the same kind of thing when there is corruption. So these are some of the areas in the public sector. Also, the whole area of tax and the importance of ensuring that we do have a multilateral exchange of information. The standard has been developed by the OECD, the G20 have committed, and hopefully that by the end of 2015, early 2016, all countries will have given themselves what they need in order to give effect to that. Because that multilateral exchange, hopefully, will do a number of things. It will prevent tax evasion. or it will find the money that has been stashed away in this case, and it will also help on illicit financial flows going into various sectors in our countries. So that is a very important one. The other area is also on what we're calling having a public register of beneficial owners of companies, because people who are trying to launder money that they have stolen, or the illicit the illicit crime group, the illicit trade in children, in people, in drugs and in arms, always look for a way to hide their money. And as more is being done by the G20 and by the Anti-Corruption Working Group to require the banks to do their due diligence, require the banks to cooperate when there are bona fide investigations, then it means that those who want to hide illicit money, they'll look for other places. One of the places is in equity ownership in companies and in the development of trusts. So this is another very important area. The G8 has started to push for that, and the G20 is looking at it at this time. So these are some of the recovery of assets. Is another one, which is an important area for the Anti-Corruption Working Group. The whole question of transfer pricing for industries so that people avoid paying taxes in their jurisdictions where they operate is another one, famous BEPS. So, I mean, these are some of the major areas which I think are very, very important and are being discussed with the Anti-Corruption Working Group. And some of them are already moving forward in a very good way.
So some strong goals have been set and there is some action already taking place, but we are talking about some very significant challenges, very entrenched issues. What is the one message you would say, finally, that the C20 should be taking into consideration when they think about how to move forward and how to have a true impact in the short, medium and long term?
I think that the C20 is really doing quite a lot of that, but I have found over the years, working with governments or being in the government side, that what you need is not only for people to identify the problems, but to be able to go forward with constructive and specific recommendations that will deal with the issues of our time. And I think that's part of what the C20 has started to do, and I think I'm finding at this meeting a lot of very good collaboration and listening to each other and building each other's agenda into the communique, into the recommendations to the G20. And of course, each organization also puts forward its own recommendation. But I would say that in terms of really getting traction and action, let's make sure that what we recommend is, that we not only identify the problems, but recommend some specific actions that, if taken, will make a difference.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.